Hello, this is the second update to a recent video on the YMS Scalper indicator. If you haven't seen the earlier video, I will leave a link in the description, but you don't need to see that in order to understand this video. This will be a fully self-contained video, and I will give you a quick 30-second rundown on where we are. In the initial video, I was asked to review the YMS Scalper indicator, and I was actually sent a link to download the file. I downloaded that file but found that it was actually a completely different indicator. So I then did a web search for YMS Scalper and found several links. There is this link which takes me to a website where I can purchase the YMS Scalper indicator, but then there are also other links where I can download free versions. On comparison, the free versions have the same appearance as the paid indicator, but I have no way to know if they're actually the same because I didn't want to actually pay for the indicator to download it. So I eventually ran tests on the free downloaded versions of the indicator, and I also said that I would return with further videos to show how I wrote the code for the indicator that I was sent, which was not the YMS Scalper, it was actually the Beast Super Signal, and how I wrote code to test the YMS Scalper. Now, as I said, these are free versions of an indicator that is for sale. So for all I know, these are as genuine as a $10 Rolex. But that's not really important today because the coding techniques that I'm showing should be useful anyway. So just treat this as a coding exercise. You can download these free indicators if you do a quick Google search. And I'll be showing you today how I write this. The earlier video, firstly there was the test of the YMS Scalper indicator where I wrote an expert advisor, and that's what I'm recreating today. The second video actually came in two parts, and that's where I wrote the code to run an expert advisor on the Beast Super Signal indicator. And I wrote that code for both Metatrader 4 for the version that I'd been sent, and Metatrader 4 and Metatrader 5 for the latest version of the Beast Super Signal indicator. And today I am writing code for Metatrader 4 for version 2 of the YMS Scalper indicator free download. I'm only writing this for Metatrader 4 because the indicator only seems to come for Metatrader 4, so I can't write Metatrader 5 expert code using a Metatrader 4 indicator. So before we actually write any code, the first step is going to be to review the indicator, investigate it, and learn something about how it works so that we know how to write the code to use that indicator. So we'll jump over to Metatrader 4 now. I'll load up the indicator and we'll do some investigation. Now, if you saw the first video where I ran the tests, some of this will be duplicated, but just for those people who haven't seen it, I have here the YMS Scalper version 2 and version 1.2. I won't go through it, but when I've compared version 1.2 and version 2, the results are the same. There is one input missing from version 2, but other than that, it seems to calculate the same results. So first I'm going to just copy that onto the chart. And I can see the inputs. There is input 1 here, which is just a heading. So that has no particular value. It's just there to separate other sections of the inputs. Then there's an MA input and a stochastic input, and then another heading. And then the rest of these relate to colors of lines, whether I want alerts to be displayed or not. And the arrow gap and width will be for the visual effect of displaying the arrows on the chart. So the only two real values that affect the way the calculations run would be this MA and stochastic. Anything else, if it exists, will be hard-coded inside the indicator. So these are really the only two that I'm going to need to worry about as inputs later. And I can see that it's come up with a number of signals. Here are some signals in a teardrop shape below the candles, and here are some diamond shapes above. And I'm going to assume that the diamond shapes above are indications to sell and the teardrops below are indications to buy. And then there is a chart down here. I'm not sure if that has any particular value, but all I'm trying to do is write an expert advisor that will trade when these signals appear on the chart. So I'm not too worried about this line chart below. As I move my mouse across the chart, and I'll zoom into the data window here, you can see there are two values in the data window and they seem to be changing. And they seem to be related to the value in this lower chart. But what I'm looking for is the values to tell me when one of these teardrops or diamonds has occurred. I don't see anything in particular that happens when I put the mouse over a diamond or over the candle that has one of the diamonds or the teardrops. And one of the common techniques for showing these kind of indicators is to use an indicator buffer and have most of the values being empty value and only put a value into the buffer when you want one of these symbols to be drawn. But I don't see anything like that showing in the data window. It's possible that there is a buffer for this, just not shown in the data window. But right now I'm going to take the simple approach. I'm going to now open up and see the objects that are on the chart. See the object list, and I can see a lot of these arrow type objects with name quants underscore ARRO colon and then a number. Let's see what else I have down here. In fact, that's all I have. I'll just do list all in case there are some hidden ones. No. So that looks like they could be these indicators. Let me just pick this one. I'll select it. And I can now see if I just move up. Maybe I'll select a different one so it's easy to see. Unselect that. Select this one. No. That one. There. That might be easier to see on screen. This teardrop is selected now when I've selected it on the object list here. So that tells me that that is an object. And this is the name of that object. If I look at the properties of that with edit, I can see the color matches, so that's fine. It's lime. I know it's an arrow type object. I can see that it has a time and a value. Now the value will just be a price where it's positioning this on the chart. So these are simply placed below the candles and the diamonds are placed above. So the actual price doesn't mean anything to me. The existence of this signal tells me that there is a trade to happen there. I can see that it has an arrow code 83, so that will be the teardrop shape. If I look at the next one on the list, edit that, it has a code of 116, and that's the diamond. And that should have a color of red, yes. Now also looking at it, I can see a number here. Every object on the chart must have a unique name, but these numbers look suspiciously like date time values. Now, I won't take you through all the rest of the work that I did on this, but I then wrote a quick piece of script to actually display the number that was associated with the dates on these candles, and I can tell you that these numbers actually are the date times of the opening of these candles. So that's my investigation done. I now know that the teardrops and the diamonds are objects on the chart. They are objects of type arrow. I know that the teardrops have a character value of 83 and the diamonds are a 116. I'll write that down later. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the appearance of these objects on the chart, and I know that the names of them will correspond to the date time value of the opening of the candle. So that's going to make this quite easy. The values in the data window seem to be related just to this line in the bottom chart. And if you saw the first video, you'll know that there's actually another line that you simply can't see here. So I'm not going to worry about those. They don't mean anything to me in terms of deciding when to trade. So with all of that information, I can now go into the Metatrader 4 editor and write the code to trade on these signals. Now I have Metatrader 4 open here. The YMS Scalper indicators that I have are only for Metatrader 4, so I won't be showing in Metatrader 5 for this. I'm just going to go to the editor, and in here I've already created a folder called Orchard underneath the experts folder, and inside Orchard I've created a folder called YMS Scalper Expert. So I'm just going to right click on that and go new file. It's an expert advisor, YMS Scalper Expert. I won't fill in any parameters here. Next, next, and finish. And now I'll just take a minute to tidy this up because I just don't like the format. And now the first thing I want to add are the inputs for the expert advisor. And the first of the inputs will be some inputs to the indicator. It really only has two inputs that affect the way the calculations are done. The rest are all either comments or colors, etc. So I'm only going to be capturing two inputs. And now I know how the objects are named, but I'm going to make these inputs just in case in a future version of the indicator they change. So here I'm capturing the 3 things or the 4 things that I know about the objects. The names all begin with quants_arrow colon. They are all of type object or obj_arrow. The buy arrows have a character code of 83 and the sell arrows have a character code of 116. And now I have some inputs just for the expert advisor for the order size and take profit and stop loss. So a simple order size, and this expert will just place orders at a fixed size. So that's just the number of lots. And then take profit pips and stop loss pips. And I'll have to convert these take profit pips and stop loss pips. I'll have to convert those to actual price values later. And then the 2 final inputs are the magic number and a trade comment. I like to allow entry of the magic number just in case you want to run the same expert twice with different settings. That way the trades won't conflict. And also in case by some chance you have another expert that's using the same magic number, you can at least enter your own number here. And then just a simple trade comment that will be attached to each trade. And now I'm going to add the code to load in the YMS Scalper indicator. But for this particular expert advisor, that's not necessary. I'll first write the expert advisor showing how I include the indicator, and then when I'm done, I'll show how you can run this without including the indicator at all. And the way I'm doing this, I've described it in an earlier video. I'll just get the URL for that video and unpaste it in here. That video will describe why I'm doing this the way I am, instead of simply using an iCustom with a path to the indicator later. Now let me just do one more thing and then I'll explain why I'm doing this. I just do a refresh there. Here in Orchard I have the YMS Scalper indicator. Here in the, also do a refresh there. Here in the expert for YMS Scalper expert, I'm going to create a new folder underneath that. And I'm just going to copy YMS Scalper v2. I won't worry about the other indicator. Now, a little bit of explanation of what I've done. This video will explain why I use the define and the resource. It explains that, and it's mainly to make sure that I'm insulated from knowing that where I run this expert, it has to have the indicator there. So by using a resource, the indicator becomes embedded inside this expert and I don't need to have a path to the indicator. Typically indicators stay in the indicators folder, but in this case I've copied my indicator to a subfolder here called indicators underneath the expert folder. This line, resource double quotes plus indicator path YMS, the double quotes are actually not necessary, but if I were to put this inside the indicators folder, so if I loaded it from the usual place, I would need to put the beginning of a path there. But because this is a relative path, just indicators / YMS Scalper, that should be a dot, then I actually don't need anything, but rather than remove that, I just leave this as an empty string. It's no harm, it's resolved at compile time. And then this hash define indicator YMS : the video here explains how that works and how it makes it more robust to load an indicator that way. Now, the reason that I'm copying the indicator into this indicators subfolder, by using this resource statement, there is a path length limit on this path. If I have the indicator in the indicators folder, and maybe because it's a third-party indicator, it might be buried several layers deep in folders and may even have quite a lengthy name, I might exceed the path length limit here. So The first reason that I like to copy the indicators into a subfolder under my expert is to eliminate the problem that I might have an excessive path length. The second reason is that if this is a third-party indicator, there might be a revision or an update to that, which maybe does something like change the inputs or just changes the way the indicator works. I don't want to automatically begin using a new version without thinking about that. So because I've taken a copy of this, that copy will remain the same until I decide that I want to put a new version of the indicator in here. So this not only resolves the path length issue, but it also means that I'm insulated from random changes to the original indicator. So I'll move on now. I have these two inputs, the INP take profit pips and stop loss pips. I'm going to convert those from number of pips to a price value. So I'm just going to create two global variables to hold that, so I don't need to keep making that conversion. So now I'll begin with my statements in OnInit. The first here is something that is not necessary to the expert. When you see me run this expert in demonstrations, it will display the symbol in large characters on the screen. And so I have a function that does that rather than write special code for it each time. I just copy this function in. It has nothing to do with the running of the expert. It's purely there to help with demonstrations. But sometimes people see these things and ask why their copy of the expert doesn't do that. So I'm actually going to include this here. Very quick explanation. And it has nothing to do, as I said, with the way the expert runs. Right, so now I'll just go to the bottom of the code and I'll paste that function. Actually, I'll write the rest of this and then I'll paste, because I've got another boilerplate function that I'm using here. So this is my other boilerplate function, pips to double. So I'll go to the bottom of the code. I'll just paste these two functions in and then explain quickly what they do. Start with pips to double. It takes the input, which is the number of pips, gets the number of digits for the current symbol using the symbol info integer, symbol and symbol underscore digits. And then I convert pips into points. Now, depending whether the number of digits is 3 or 5, I will multiply pips by 10 to get number of points. Otherwise, I'll multiply by 1. So what I'm saying, if this is a 3-digit quoted symbol, I'm going to assume that a pip is 10 points. And if it's a 5-digit quoted symbol, I'm going to assume that a pip is 10 points. And if it's any other size in digits, then I'm going to assume that a pip is 1 point. So I simply say number of pips multiplied by, if digits are equal to 3 or digits are equal to 5, then I'll multiply pips by 10, and otherwise I'll multiply pips by 1. And then to convert pips to an actual value, it's just number of points multiplied by the size of a point, and I get that with symbol info double, symbol and symbol underscore point. And then I just return that value. So that's my standard pips to double function. Show currency label. The label has a name. All objects on screen have a name, and I'm just calling it currency label. And the chart ID 0 is the current chart. So I just define those. First thing I do is delete that object. Object delete chart ID currency label. I probably could have just put name there. I perform this delete just to make sure that it's not already there and showing something else. So if you've loaded a template from somewhere, this may already exist. There is no harm in calling object delete if the object doesn't exist. It simply won't happen. So this just makes sure I'm cleaned up. And then all I do is object create a chart ID name. It's a type label, and then 0 is the sub window because I'm putting it on the main window, and then the price and time I'm just setting to 0 because I'm going to be setting those a little further down the position of this. And then I reset some of the properties. Object set string, I'm pasting in the symbol there with the obprop text. Object set integer, then the color, I'm just making it a gray color. I'm setting the font size to 60 so it's nice and big. I'm anchoring it with obprop anchor to the left upper corner of the chart, and I'm setting the corner of the object as the left upper corner of the object. And that way I can set the X distance and the Y distance at 100 away from the upper left corner of the chart. And that's all that does. Now back to the code. I don't need to do anything in OnDinit, so now all the rest of the work can happen in OnTick. I only want to process this once on each bar, so I'm going to put in a couple of lines of code here to test whether this is a new bar. Now you might have seen in other videos that I have a standard function called isNewBar. I'm not using it here for a good reason. I'm going to just write these couple of lines of code, and then later I'm going to come back and enhance this, and you'll see why I'm not using the isNewBar function. So I will leave a link in the description to the video where I talk about the isNewBar function, because that will explain this in more detail. But all I'm doing is setting up a static date time, next bar time, should be a capital B, where I'm capturing initially the start time for bar number 0. I have a date time current bar time, and this will capture the same thing but on every time this function is called. So the static means that next bar time will hold this value that it had on the previous call. And I'm simply saying if the current bar time is less than or equal to the next bar, return. And then I set next bar to current bar time, just so that the next time I come in here, it will simply hit this return statement. And that makes sure this just runs once per bar. And now I'm going to call the custom indicator that I've added in with that resource statement. As I say here, you don't need this value. That's the value that I'm pulling back here. Don't need that at all. I'm only calling iCustom so that I can force the indicator to run once at the beginning of the bar. I could probably have just made the call without capturing the value, but I guess this is just habit. But also, if you're not using the embedded indicator, which I mentioned earlier, you don't even need this line. But I'll come back later and show how you can run this without having the embedded indicator. I think it's probably safer to embed the indicator, but you can run it another way. Indicator YMS. So the iCustom first two arguments are the symbol and the period, so they're coming from the chart. The next is the path to the indicator, and that's the defined variable from above. Let me scroll up here. Here it is, which begins with the double colon, and that's necessary for calling the indicator as a resource. And then I'm just calling this for bar number 0 and buffer number 0, because I really don't care about the value that comes back. So next I want to find if one of those indicator, a buy indicator or sell indicator object, has been created on the chart for this bar or for bar number 0. So we already know that the object names consist of the prefix and then the date time of that bar just as a number. So current bar time is the date time of the current bar. I'm casting that into a number with the long so it doesn't get treated as an actual date time, and then I'm just converting that to a string. I'm using the object find to see if an object has been created of this name, and object find chart number and name will return a negative number if the object is not found. So if that returns a number less than 0, then I just return from the function because there has been no indicator created. I want to make sure that the object, if I've found one with this name, is of the right type, so that there isn't just some random object on screen that just happens to have that name. So it must be of obprop type, must be of the type that I've input in the object type, which should be an arrow type. So object get integer 0 name obprop type, and comparing that to the object type that was input, and if that's not the same, then I just return. And now I want to get the code of that object. So remember, I have a different code for an up arrow and a different code for a down. So there is a property called obprop_arrow code. I get that with object get integer, chart number, and name of the object. I'm casting that to an integer because this actually comes back as a long. And now I just need to test to see if this object code is a buy type or a sell type. So a quick comparison, if that object code that I retrieved is equal to the buy code that was input, then I'm going to call OpenTrade function with order type buy. and OpenTrade's a function I'm about to write a little further down. I'm not just assuming that if it's not a buy it must be a sell, so I'm also then testing else if object code is equal to input sell code, then OpenTrade for order type sell. Just in case it's been created and it's something else. So if there's a future revision to the indicator that shows some other kind of character, then I don't want to be opening trades assuming that they're sells just because they're not a buy. And that should be the end of the code for OnTick. The only function that I'm missing now should be this OpenTrade function. So let's write that. Just initializing some variables that I need, the entry price, the stop loss price, and the take profit price. So if the type's an order type buy, then I'm going to be opening this at the ask price, which I get with symbol info double symbol underscore ask. And then the stop loss is price minus the stop loss amount. That's the one that was calculated as a global variable earlier. And the take profit is price plus the take profit. Now in this case, I can simply say else because this is only called internally and I'm only ever going to be calling this function with a buy or a sell order type. So I can simply say else. And then I'll just copy this. So the price becomes symbol underscore bid. And stop loss becomes price plus the stop loss, and take profit becomes price minus take profit. Now I just want to make sure that these are valid numbers to be using. You could have entered anything in the stop loss and take profit pips. To do that, I'm using normalized double, and the first thing I need to do is capture the number of digits for the symbol. Now this is Metatrader 4 and you could use some of the shortcut functions for this. I'm using symbol info integer instead of simply the digits function because this is easier to translate into Metatrader 5. I don't need to make any changes here after this. And now that I have the price, the stop loss and the take profit, I can simply place the trade. So order send function, first argument is the symbol, the type of the order being placed, which is from the input here, so it's an order type buy or an order type sell. The order size from the inputs, so the default was one lot. Price as calculated here. I'm setting 0 for slippage, you can adjust that if you want to, but I'm allowing unlimited slippage. The stop loss and take profit prices, the trade comment from the inputs, and the magic number from the inputs. Now I'm capturing ticket here. If order send fails, then I'll get an invalid ticket number, a negative or a 0 ticket number. And so I'm just going to print an error message in that case. I'm not doing anything to handle it. And it's worth mentioning also at this point, I'm not performing any of the standard housekeeping type error handling. So I'm not making sure that the numbers you enter in the inputs are valid numbers. I'm not checking to see that trading is allowed. I'm not checking to see that you have sufficient funds. I'm doing none of that. So you may want to add those things. This is purely an expert advisor that I've written to run the tests. Those other error checks are things that you should be including, but I'm not going to include them here because it simply makes the video too long. So I'm using the print format statement for this, and in the print format statement I give a template, and %s is a string placeholder, %f is a floating point number placeholder, and I'm filling that in with the symbol name. I'm converting the type to a string with enum to string, so it's a little easier to read, and then just the price, the stop loss, and the take profit. I think that's everything. Let me just see if this compiles. Now this is a good point. I've got an error here. If I double click that error, I go to here, and there's nothing wrong with this particular statement, or at least it appears there's nothing wrong. But remember, this is a define, and they're not like variables. The define actually replaces that string inside the code with the thing that it's defined as before the compile runs. So I need to go back to where this is defined. And I can see that indicator YMS is defined as ;+ indicator path YMS. And here is the error that I should have had an uppercase P. Then the other thing I have here is implicit conversion from number to string. That's probably due to the same error. I'll compile again, and that's fixed. Now I realize that I've also missed something in this iCustom. The first two arguments are the symbol and the period, and the next argument is the path to the indicator. The last two values are the bar number and the buffer number you want to get the value for. But in between those, in between this path and the last two, are the inputs to the indicator. I'll just wrap this around to a new line to show it. And I'm going to show it for this particular indicator because if you remember from the inputs on the screen, there is a label as the first input, and then the two inputs that I've captured here. So I've captured the, where are they? I've captured the period and the stochastic, or the MA period and the stochastic period. But on the chart, when we added this indicator, there was a line above that, which is just a label. It has no particular value. But because that's a position in the list of inputs, it must be filled if I'm going to call the iCustom. Now also, because it has no value, I can just fill that with an empty string. And there are the two inputs that I'm going to supply. There are a lot more inputs to the indicator. Mostly they are colors and line styles. I don't want to supply those, and I don't need to. The iCustom will take as many inputs as I provide and fill in any remaining inputs with the default values for that indicator. So because I only have these two that are actually of any value in adjusting the way the indicator works, that's all I'm going to capture and all I'm going to fill in. And I'm going to let all of the line styles, colors be as defaults. Check the compile. Good. I'll just jump back into Metatrader and run this quickly just to make sure it runs, but we're not testing the actual indicator here. That was done in the earlier video. I'm just checking to see that this will run and take some trades. So running this in visual mode now, and you can see here is that symbol that I display on screen. So I've already shown how to, and you can see that the indicator doesn't show. There are no earlier indications. And the first time I reach a new bar, I call the indicator, and then these signals appear all over the chart. So it's being called on the new bar as expected. Let me just speed this up, and we'll go until we get a new signal and place a trade. I was a little slow there, but it has placed two trades. It placed a buy trade because this is the buy signal. It placed a buy trade which came into a loss, and another buy trade that came into a loss. I'll just let it run and see if I can get a sell trade. At last, sell trade. So placed the order here and then closed out, and I have to shrink this, and now it's entered a buy trade because I've got an indicator there. So I'm satisfied at this point that that's running and doing the right things. You will want to add the, as I said, housekeeping type check functions into the code. Let me explain a couple of extra things though, and I said that I would show this, so I'll just stop that and go back to the code. I said that you don't need to embed the indicator at all. You can do that by actually loading the indicator onto the chart, because this expert is looking for objects on the chart. So if I simply removed these three lines and then remove this line, I can still run the expert, but it will find nothing. But if I then add that indicator onto my chart with whatever settings I want to give the indicator, then the expert will find those objects being created. That also would mean that you don't need these inputs for the indicator, because it will run with whatever you've set up on the chart. And so if you choose not to embed the indicator here, you can still leave these lines in if you want to, but it's kind of pointless. You don't need those lines. You wouldn't need these inputs because you're not going to be calling the indicator from within this code. And then you wouldn't need this to run the indicator. You just need to make sure it is already loaded on the chart. Now this is also why I have written this code here to check for the next bar. If you've loaded the indicators separately, it's entirely possible that due to timing, the expert will process the new bar before the indicator processes the new bar, and in that case the object for the buy or sell flag may not exist at the time the expert runs. So you may need to allow a little extra time for the expert to look for that object before giving up on this bar and then waiting for the next bar to open. And so to achieve that, I'm just going to add a few more lines of code here. So the first is this next end time, and that is next bar time, which is a fixed value from here, plus 10. So I'm saying that the next end time is 10 seconds after the next bar opens. What I'm going to be looking for then is that object to be created within the first 10 seconds. So you can adjust this as you like. And then just current time, I'm just capturing it. I could use time current further on, but I'm just capturing that into a single value here because I want to know if the current time is between this next bar and the next end. I'm going to remove these two lines, or at least comment them out. Okay, so let's see if we can work through this. If the current time is less than the next bar time, that means that I'm waiting for a new bar to start, and so I can simply return. If the current bar time, this is the start time for the current bar, is greater than the next bar time, I've put that line in there to cope with things like weekends, where you may have set the next bar time as Saturday morning and yet the markets are closed. And so the next time the expert actually runs, it will be Monday morning. And in that case, current bar time will be greater than the next bar time. And so I'm simply setting next bar time equal to the current bar time, and the next end time, again, next bar time plus 10. So I'm just resetting that in case the current bar time has skipped ahead of the next bar. And then the last test here, if current time, not current bar time, current time, is greater than the end time, and end time is 10 seconds after the start of the bar, then I reset next bar time to whatever the current bar is plus period seconds period, which is effectively the start time of the next bar when it opens. And after that I should have a return. And then return. So this will keep running until the current time is after the end time, which is 10 seconds after the start of the bar. That should allow enough time for the indicator to run and to pop up the signals on the chart. That's if you are running this with the indicator on the chart independently of loading the indicator inside the expert. It does mean you have to remember to load the indicator, but it also gives you a bit of flexibility in how the indicator is loaded and displayed that you don't really get by embedding the indicator inside the expert. Let me just compile to make sure I didn't make any errors in that piece of code. At least no compile errors. Right, and that's it. So that's it for writing the code for the YMS Scalper. The one thing that I can't say is always going to be true is for this particular indicator, the object names include the date time value of that bar. You may need to look for something else. You'll just have to investigate those and make the adjustments as necessary. But otherwise, this is the general purpose code for objects that appear on screen to signal buys and sells. I hope this was useful to you, and until next time, thank you for watching.